Joining us now, editor-in-chief of Foreign Policy and host of FP Live, Ravi Agrawal. Independent journalist Noga Tarnopolsky also joins us, and postdoctoral associate at Yale University and contributing writer at The Atlantic, Arash Azizi. Noga, am I overstating it? Is there not as much hope as it seems like I see on the streets of Israel?
It's really hard to answer you, and especially having seen this historical collage you put together. There is an eruption of joy and relief and hope on the streets of Israel. You're not misunderstanding that. But the prime minister, who is still prime minister after 18 years now, successively in office, is a man who has devoted his entire life, his whole career, to destroying what was created on that White House lawn so many years ago. And in fact, it wasn't that long ago when he reiterated his position on September 26th at the United Nations. He stood up and said again, there will never be a Palestinian state. The war is not over. We have a job to finish. What happened in the next 2.5 days between that Friday afternoon and Monday morning when he went to the White House and agreed to Donald Trump's 20-principle plan is still going to have to be written about. But it would be a mistake to think that Netanyahu is running joyfully towards regional peace. That's not what's happening. And the relief that Israelis feel right now is the relief at what feels like they can taste the end of this miserable, grinding 2-year war in which, among other things, citizens were massacred, citizens were stolen and spirited abroad and tortured, and all of that, at least, will be behind them. But the big questions remain ahead.
Arash, what about the broader Middle East? How are they seeing this moment?
I think the Arab countries really celebrate this moment. The important thing is that they were able to come together to bring it about. I think in President Trump, they saw a partner. If, in the UN last couple of weeks ago in New York, you could see, speaking to a lot of Arab diplomats from countries like Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Egypt, United Arab Emirates. They thought that they had a partner in President Trump who meaningfully was putting pressure on Israel, something that they really hadn't seen. And I think all of us can agree that the type of pressure Trump brought on Israel to make this happen was rare and extraordinary. I don't think we ever quite saw it from President Biden, for example, or that's anyways the impression of the many Arab countries. So I think they welcome it, but they also know this is the first part of a 20 plan. And as Noga rightly said, Netanyahu is not exactly attuned to the end goals of this peace. So many difficult decisions remain. But I think it's really a moment tonight. We can say all over the Middle East, by the way, in Iran as well, and in Turkey, everywhere else, there was some happiness and some relief that this carnage in Gaza might come to an end, and hostages might be released, and there might be at least a pause in this terrible war that has helped, turn the region asunder in the last 2 years.
So let's focus on that interluding few days between when Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, Ravi, was here at the UN and when Donald Trump presented him with that plan and he eventually signed on. And I want to add to something that Noga said. It's not just that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has been a part of a party and leading a movement that's been hell-bent on destroying everything the Oslo Accords tried to create over the last 30 years. There's now people even to the right of him who played even more destructive roles in that time period. Ben-Gvir, according to a crazy deep dive, I believe, done by David Remnick at The New Yorker, Ben-Gvir was the one who stole the medallion off of Rabin's Cadillac to show the ultranationalist party how close you could get to him. And there's talk about whether that was ultimately what led to the assassination of Rabin. He's now in the government. He's the one pulling Benjamin Netanyahu even farther to the right. So because of that and because of Netanyahu's life work, what could have possibly happened? Is it just that Donald Trump makes this moment more interesting, or I guess makes this moment different than any other?
These are great questions, Katie, and I really appreciate how you framed all of this with the history. We mustn't forget the history behind what's led us to this moment, both the 30-year history and the last 30 days. I say 30 days because exactly 30 days ago, I think Israel overstepped. It attacked Doha in Qatar as it was trying to attack senior Hamas leaders. It failed. Qatar, of course, very close to this administration in the United States, really complained vehemently about it. Trump heard them out. In those intervening days between Netanyahu's speech at the UN and today, the United States advanced new security guarantees for Qatar. And what this meant is that Israel, which now has apologized to Qatar, and there are all these images of Netanyahu calling the leader of Qatar and apologizing. Those images went viral in the Middle East. They can no longer attack senior leadership of Hamas in Qatar. And that means the idea of totally eliminating Hamas is gone. So that was one element of the pressure on Netanyahu. He knew what he could and couldn't do, and he had really upset Trump and had gone too far, I think, one step too far after having gone too far for 2 years. But I think Hamas as well recognized that, in as much as Trump was putting real pressure on Netanyahu, he had also given Israel carte blanche to go all the way in Gaza City if they didn't agree to the plan. And so I have to say, credit where credit is due. Trump exerted actual pressure in these circumstances on both sides in a way that we haven't seen in the last 2 years. That's why we are where we are. But I really appreciate, again, the cautious tone in this conversation, because the exchange, the hostage and prisoner exchange, has not taken place. It could still fall through. And a lot of the road ahead is still very murky.